So, as we look back at the Mecha Sally arc 10 years later, and this being the month, as I've said already in a couple of videos, that the weaponized portion came into play. One of the things that I'm sure a lot of fans make, a comparison to when it comes to something like this is Marvel's Dark Phoenix Saga, or the Phoenix Saga entirely, from, the X-Men run in the late 70s, throughout the 80s, and the various adaptations we got, continuations and all that throughout the 90s and 2000s and everything. But basically, front and center, the initial saga itself. And the reason people would make a comparison to the Phoenix Saga when it comes to something like, let's say, the Mecha Sally deal, as well as other, events, story character driven, character changing, if you will, events in other media, is because of how significant the Phoenix Saga was. See, the Phoenix Saga was a big deal. Not just, for the X-Men, but overall the entire Marvel universe as far as the comics were concerned. Also, it's the fact that it was an event that, when it happened originally, in the, basically the original adaptation, that is, pretty much confirmed right off the bat that we were going to lose a couple of characters, if not a significant character, when it was all said and done. And that, of course, being the character of Jean Grey, who was possessed by the Phoenix's essence, by the Phoenix's spirit. Now, true, when they did the first animated adaptation of it in the 90s for the third season of X-Men, they did temporarily kill her off, but they basically set it up to where she was, gonna come back. I mean, the fact that you knew she was coming back, was based on the intro itself. The fact that they kept Jean in the intro instead of modifying it to take her out to make you think, oh, she's dead, they killed her off. The fact that they kept her in the intro pretty much told me, along with everybody else, that she was coming back. And initially we got that in the Dark Phoenix Saga. But the reason people would kind of look at this, as well as myself, look at this as sort of a comparison, or at least I would say Ian Flynn's, own take on it, if you will, is, the fact that it's very similar. It's very similar in a way to where, just like Jean allows herself to bond, fuse, if you will, merge into one being with the Phoenix, and thus, depending on the adaptations, carry that essence with her throughout her run in the comics. You see a similar situation with Sally. Here you have Sally sacrificing herself, to protect those that she loves, but in the process she ends up becoming, a slave of Robotnik. She becomes basically dark and evil and, not in control of her own emotions and everything, or what she says. And the comparison when it comes to the Phoenix Saga for that portion is the Dark Phoenix arc that came afterwards. Depending on the adaptation of the Phoenix Saga that you may watch or read, the Dark Phoenix portion had Jean, not act accordingly. It allowed her to get manipulated. It allowed her to act without, emotional. I wouldn't say not act without emotional repercussion, but, act out of irrational emotion, because, depending, like I said, on the adaptation that you would see or read, the Phoenix entity, when it was all said and done, would come out and admit that what they did was wrong, and that they got lost in the human trait known as emotion, that they discovered it and allowed themselves to get lost in it. And thus by getting lost in it, they lost, total control. They allowed themselves to be manipulated and used as a weapon, or, they allowed themselves to get manipulated and just basically get out of control and stuff. And the similarity with Sally's mecha situation was she was in that kind of ordeal. She was kind of in that same ordeal to where she allowed herself to be manipulated by Eggman, be controlled by Eggman, and basically allowed herself to be used as a weapon, and by being used as a weapon, be modified into a weaponized version, of who she was. And even though there are similar traits, in those areas, when you get down to it, when you compare the way you compare the fact that two major characters were put into these scenarios, if you will, to basically overall, build, the heroes back up and have them triumph over this tragedy, over this situation, and prove to their enemies, hey, no matter how much you beat us down, we're always going to rise back up. As I said before, it's a great storytelling directive to go with, if done right. And the Phoenix Saga, especially as it morphed into the Dark Phoenix Saga, was one of those examples of being done right. I mean, they basically, when they wrote it, from what I could tell, they had it all planned out from beginning to end of how, it was going to effectively change things, the status quo, that, if you will, of the Marvel Universe, of the X-Men portion of the Marvel Universe, and as I said, the entire Marvel Universe as a whole. They had it mapped out from beginning to end. Now, true, did it have a few flaws in between? Absolutely. But when you look at the fact that how it started, how they began with it, I should say, how they had a good middle ground, and then a good conclusion overall, when you combine it all together, that right there is an example of, doing something like this correctly, doing something like this and making sure there's no hiccups in between that could disrupt the storytelling. And I'm not saying that there wasn't any situations where the storytelling was disrupted, but still, the Phoenix/Dark Phoenix Saga is a good example of something of that caliber being done right. And when you look at the Mecha Sally deal, like I've said before, the planning, obviously, everything, that they wanted to, set their sights on, end goal wise, was good. It was all set up perfectly. But basically, the execution fell flat. It really did. I mean, they started out, I'll give them credit, they started out all right. They had some moments, but overall, it fell flat. That's the one thing that when you try to do your own version or your own take on a story situation, where you take a character like a Sally, similar to a Jean Grey, and put them into that role of a character that's at the center of it because of what's happened to them, the big difference is, again, they knew what they were doing. They executed it from beginning, middle, and end, seamlessly, if you will, to give us a good story that, unfortunately, every time it's, a studio like 20th Century tries to adapt it into a movie, they fall flat on their face because they're trying to, do this adaptation of, of this iconic story arc, but they can't do it because of the fact that, the main portion of it involves, outer space, involves them going into space and dealing with this. Now I'll give the recent adaptation some credit. At least they did touch upon that, if you will. They did touch upon that, unlike The Last Stand, which, for some odd reason, it didn't. The recent one touched upon it, but Last Stand didn't, which, is hard to fathom, if you will. It's hard to fathom. But besides those adaptations, every continuation of the story, or at least touch upon it and everything, is done very well, in my opinion. It's done to stay true to what the story was, to how effective the story, was from beginning, middle, and end when it originally came out. How much of an impact it made afterwards, how much it affected the status quo afterwards of not just the X-Men portion of the Marvel Universe, but, as I said earlier, the entire Marvel Universe as a whole. The Mecha Sally arc, I could see basically what Ian wanted to do. I could see that he wanted, it to have a similar effect, when it was all said and done. but again, the execution just fell flat on its face. He had everything. I mean, obviously, they had everything planned out correctly, and started out okay, but then over time they just fell flat on their face because they didn't. I mean, they had a decent beginning. I'll give them that, but the middle and the end, just fell flat. I mean, I'll grant you the end portion didn't really come to fruition because of the lawsuit behind the scenes that caused them to modify things basically on the fly. But the middle portion is where really you either keep the attention of your readers and your subscribers and your fans and all that, or you lose them. And in this case, Ian Flynn, I think he has to admit it, whether he'll do it or not, he kind of lost them there. He kind of lost them there because of the fact that, he was becoming repetitive. Like I said, the only interesting part about the entire arc, when you think about it, was the Secret Freedom Fighters and the Team Freedom, I think that's what their name was, that remained in New Mobotropolis and infiltrated New Mobotropolis to try to oust King Nagus, or Ixis Nagus, as the king. So those were the only interesting portions of it, while everything else, as far as like Sonic's, Tails, and Amy going after the Death Egg to retrieve Sally and all that, fell flat on its face. And when you really think about it, deep down, I think the reason it fell flat on its face is because the main characters that were going after the Death Egg, that were going after, it to, stop, to finally put an end to Eggman, stop him in his tracks, get Sally, rescue her, were main game characters. And I get, that's a requirement. You got to put the focus on them. I totally understand. But even if you have to do that, you should make sure that if you're going to go that route, that the middle portion of the arc that involves them, of this major arc, is intriguing. It's interesting. It keeps people on their toes. It keeps them invested, and it doesn't fall flat, and you end up losing those people that you want to keep, around for the rest of the story arc. So when people compare, in the end, when people compare stories like this, like the Mecha Sally arc, which a lot of people would view as, a writer's, attempt at their own version of the Phoenix Saga, or any kind of major comic event, where one of the characters is the central point that's, basically because of what they're dealing with, or what they're a major part of. When people make that comparison, a lot of people will always say that the difference is that when it comes to something like the Phoenix/Dark Phoenix Saga, that the people back then, and even today, if they wanted to redo it or continue it, or at least touch upon it, knew how to have a good beginning, middle, and end to, make everybody satisfied with what they read, and basically wanting more. And that's initially what the Phoenix Saga had. The Phoenix Saga, or the Phoenix/Dark Phoenix Saga, had. They had a good middle. They had a good beginning, they had a good middle, and they had a good ending. And it kept people invested from start to finish. Well, the Mecha Sally arc, or the Mecha Sally World Tour 2 Death Egg Mark II arc, had a decent beginning, but the middle fell flat. And even if he was able to see it to its proper conclusion, who's to say the conclusion would have made up for a dismal middle portion of the arc? I don't think it would have. I don't think it really would have. Even if he was able to see it through, I think even despite the fact the ending could have been okay, it wouldn't have made up for a middle portion of the arc, which, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, when you get to the middle portion of an act or a story arc, whether it's a book, whether it's a comic book, a video game story, or a story arc in a video game, or a movie, or a television miniseries, or whatever, that middle portion is always what keeps people, either continuously reading, playing, or watching, or it's going to cause them to either close the book, stop playing the game, change the channel, or walk out of the theater. That is your main prerogative, what's the word I'm looking for? Prerogative. That's your main prerogative when it comes to storytelling. It's that middle portion. And unfortunately for Ian, and I say it with all due respect to the guy, it fell flat. And anybody that worked on the book with him, like Ben Bates, Tracy Yardlin, Evan Stanley, they would probably agree that it fell flat. So in the end, when you try to do your own take, or at least pay maybe homage in some capacity to one of the more iconic story arcs in comic book history, you got to make sure you do it in a proper, respectable and justifiable way. And what that means is you have a decent beginning, which he did have, but you also follow that up by having a decent middle ground, if you will, despite whatever interruptions you may have. Always make sure you have a decent middle ground. So even if you have to change things up because of legal issues behind the scenes, you're able to have something that will keep people still invested and make them want to know how it's going to end, even if you have to modify the ending because, like I said, of legal situations. But in closing, when you compare the two, story arcs, I think this is just another lesson that if you're going to, pay respects or pay homage to iconic stories like the Phoenix/Dark Phoenix saga, then you have to do it in a proper, respectable, justifiable way. And as I just said, make sure you have a decent beginning, you have a decent middle, and if you have to modify it a little bit due to legal situations or whatever, make sure you have a decent, proper conclusion that makes sense and keeps people invested and wanting to see more and not upset or anything like that. Also, in conclusion, the one thing that the Phoenix and / Dark Phoenix saga had is you always had those moments of hope. When we got to the Dark Phoenix portion, yes, Jean was, the Phoenix entity had taken over and was trying to basically become the dominant, essence, if you will. And like I say, depending on the adaptation that you would watch or read, there were glimmers of hope to where Jean would find a way to take control. And as you got to the conclusion of that, for a portion, she was in control. She had somehow, along with Charles Xavier's help, secondly cocooned, trapped within her mind, the Phoenix entity so she can get back control of her body. And that's the one thing that the Mecha Sally arc didn't really have. I mean, sure, there were some moments, like I said, that one moment where Sally's looking out the window of her brother's hut in that village, that it looked like maybe she was starting to show a little bit of free will, but not really. Because overall, with that one little glimpse, all we had was just, a Dark Phoenix version of Sally saying all this nonsensical stuff. There was no glimmer of hope or anything, here or there, except for that one tiny moment that I mentioned. But overall, it was dominated by, her just being mindlessly manipulated and controlled. And, if there's one thing that dragged, the story down a lot for fans was that. Especially, again, if you're trying to, in your own way, make it an homage, pay tribute to an iconic story arc like that. As I was trying to say, the one thing you want to do is, just like with that iconic story, is you want to put those glimmers of hope in there. Because if not, then what's the point of doing a tribute to it if it's just going to be a downer and you don't give us those glimmers of hope, here and there, to where not only do you have that little portion that I mentioned, but you have other more full-on, moments to where, Sally eternally is trying to battle to get her free will back so she can, fight alongside her friends, or at least let them know, hey, this is what's going on, this is what he's planning, before losing control again. But they didn't have that. They didn't. And, that's the one thing I think that also led to the downfall of the book. That, made it, drop in popularity, as far as the story was concerned. So that's another lesson as well, that if you're going to pay homage somewhat to an iconic story arc like this, that you have to make sure that, just like it, especially when you get into the dark portion of it, that you give glimmers of hope for that centered character that's in that position. So overall, again, this is just another lesson, like I said, that when you do something like that, and it's as some people like myself may view it, your own way of paying tribute to an iconic story arc like that, then what you need to do is, just like with any other story that tries to pay tribute to a story arc like the Dark Phoenix one, that you have to basically make sure that during the dark portion of it, you give glimmers of hope to the character that's in the middle of it, if you know what I mean, at the center point. But What do you guys think? Do you think maybe I'm just making too much of a big deal about this? Or do you see those similarities as well? Comment down below, live chat during the premiere, like the video. Super chats and super stickers are open and would be appreciated during the premiere in the live chat. Also check me out at the Teespring store. I got some great merchandise there you guys can check out. Be really appreciative if you could do that, especially as we go into Valentine's Day and into the spring season. Be really appreciative if you can do that. Also check me out at BW Roses on Vimeo, if you will, for content you can't get anywhere else due to copyright reasons. Also check me out at patreon.com/BWRoses to help support me with a $1 or $3 tier. I am considering doing a $5 tier for Q&As in the future, but I'm still considering it. Don't hold me to that. If I do it, I'll let you know. Also check me out at Venmo at Brian-Walmer-2 to help me out financially there as well. It'd be really appreciative, especially right now. But anyway though guys, let me know what your thoughts are. Again, do you see the similarities that I was talking about? Do you think I'm making too much of a big deal about it? What are your thoughts? Again, comment below, super chat during the premiere super chat during the premiere. Those would be appreciated, if you will, because they are open, along with super stickers and everything. They would be appreciative and everything. And they are up, I should say. But yeah, let me know in the live chat. That's what I was trying to say. Let me know in the live chat, during the premiere, as well as in the comments below as well. So until next time, guys, I'm out.